in an extremely literal manner, silver is now much more precious than it has ever been in history. You can't add demand to something and then at the same time try to call it less precious. And of course, the fact that silver has this massive demand component to it makes it even more precious than gold, especially, of course, when we consider that this industrial demand is literally consuming the global stockpiles of silver.
Hey guys, welcome back. Thanks so much for pushing play. You know I appreciate it, as does my good friend, longtime friend, Jeff Nielson from Bullion Bulls Canada. He also writes for Sprott Money, and today Jeff is here to talk about his latest article, U.S. Banks, A Culture of Crime, and mining stocks. Boy, have we seen a huge rally this year and a huge correction. And Jeff's here right now. Jeff, how are you, man?
Doing great, Sean, and as usual, it's a pleasure to be back.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you, sir. And right out of the gate, Jeff, I wanted to ask you about this mining stocks rally that we've seen in 2016. You and I had corresponded earlier in the year when you were talking about the quote-unquote fake rally in precious metals, and I'd always hit you back with, yeah, but take a look at what's going on with the mining stocks. What we're seeing is a very real rally if you own these things, and you're up 3, 4, 500%. I've had the good pleasure of speaking with some really smart people in the mining industry this year, Jeff, CEOs of mining companies, and I recently spoke with this guy named Joseph Grosso. He's the CEO of Golden Arrow Resources. He's the guy responsible for the discovery of one of the largest silver deposits in history. He's been in the industry forever, and I interviewed him in May, and I asked him what his impression was of the rally year to date. Now, of course, this is before the correction, and I pulled up this soundbite I wanted to play for you. Do you mind?
No problem at all.
All right, check this out.
Well, I think that we're like an expecting father waiting for 5 years to see the baby being born. So I really feel that we are at the inception of a mining economy specifically, and I think that you referred to the printed currency. That has lost a lot of faith in the world. I really feel that at the moment that there is a pause, there is a slight pause towards the US dollar, and that pause is allowing the oldest currency in the world, which has been gold and silver, and that is now in favor because there is fear.
Yeah.
When there is fear, that's when the gold does best.
When there's fear, that's when gold does best. As we know, that couldn't be more true. And did you catch one thing he said in there, Jeff? He said, we are at the inception of a mining economy. I found that very interesting, and I wanted to play that for you because I think he's right. I think the world is turning against the central banking crimes, and I wonder if he's right. I wonder if we are at the inception of returning to a mining economy. What's your take on what's happened with the mining stocks this year?
Well, relating that clip to my own work, let's back up a bit and talk about, of course, the tough years, because these are the companies that have been the victims of these bankers. There was two aspects to this. There was the manipulation of the stock prices of these companies below any rational valuation in relation to their assets and their operations. But the second dimension to this has been the overall sabotage of the global economy by this crime syndicate. Because the only reason, of course, we've seen commodity prices suppressed. Now, under normal circumstances, when you do that, what should happen is that the world should be burning through the inventories of those commodities. And of course, as the inventories get exhausted, prices have to rise to boost supply, because in markets for hard commodities, you have to have those commodities to service the industrial needs. But what's happened, of course, is we've had this massive sabotage of the global economy. In particular, we've had the banking crime syndicate undermining the so-called emerging market economies, and pretty much any and every economy outside of the Western Bloc, which of course they're cannibalizing on their own. So what this has done is it has artificially suppressed global demand for all goods, and of course the inputs to go into those goods, which are the hard commodities. So this artificially suppressed demand has been the other key factor in keeping these companies held down. So of course, this year we saw the pressure come off in terms of the suppression of share prices. And so the companies have been allowed to somewhat rise to their fair market value in relation to current prices. But of course, the current commodity prices themselves have been artificially suppressed. And at some point, this sabotage of the global economy is going to exhaust itself, and there's going to be a rebound from that manipulation as well, because of course humanity needs to build things to move, advance itself, and this, you can only suppress and suppress for so long before there's a pent up need for more goods and services, and the growth that accompanies that. The one cycle we saw that was terminated in 2008 should have never ended. If it wasn't for the demand destruction by this crime syndicate, there never would have been the crash of '08. The emerging market economies would still be strong and if not booming, and that growth would be helping the whole world. So I mean, they've set back the development of the entire global economy with their crimes over the past 5 years or so. But everything is finite, and manipulation of this nature cannot be sustained forever.
All right, well, let me ask you then about this latest correction we've seen in the mining stocks. The reason I want to hit on this is because I was very public about buying some of these stocks right towards the top, And my feeling is that Wall Street money, big money, smart money that cannot buy physical, a lot of these pension funds are disallowed from buying physical precious metals, so they have to buy other assets, ETFs or mining shares. I think this is my opinion, I think we're seeing a Wall Street motivated correction, right? So that the smart money, the big money, can buy more of these shares. And I guess the question is this. On Friday, we saw silver and gold down just a little bit after a pretty good week. And Harvey Organ notes that although there was a mild rate on gold and silver metals Friday, there was a huge whacking of the gold and silver equities as bankers threw another temper tantrum. How low do you think they're going to take this? They can't possibly take these things back down to the 2015, bottom. Can they? What do you think is going on with the mining shares right now? Why has the correction been this severe?
Okay, well, my view here is a lot more sinister. First of all, I think that a lot of the increase in the share prices of these companies came from bankers' own money. And I think you can divide the money that came in from the banking sector into two groups. There was the individual banksters themselves, knowing that these companies are going to be allowed to rally, getting in and making a fast buck. Because, of course, that's something they're notorious for. Anytime they know in advance that something's going to be changing direction, of course, they jump in first, get the easy money, and cash out. Now, the other component in this buying that I've been extremely concerned about, and I'm sure you've heard about it, is that Western central banks have been accumulating large quantities of shares in precious metals miners.
Yes, Switzerland and Norway have begun to buy precious metals mining shares. Go ahead.
Yes, and the point here is they're calling this part of their quote-unquote asset purchases. But it does not follow the pattern of any of these other asset purchases, which have always gone into bubble markets. The bubble corporations, the bond bubbles, that's where all of these central bank asset purchases have been going, to keep the bubbles pumped up. Well, of course, the mining sector is the opposite of a bubble. We're talking about companies that are ultra suppressed. So there's no way to reconcile those asset purchases with their previous asset purchases. I had somebody suggesting that the central banks were buying these mining stocks to get exposure to precious metals, but the problem there is that they could buy every mining share in existence, and it doesn't officially add a single ounce of gold to their reserves. So, there's no rational incentive for central banks to get into the precious metals market in this manner. If they wanted exposure to precious metals, they would do what the central banks in the East are doing, and they'd be buying gold themselves. So, the moment I heard about these central bank purchases, I became extremely concerned because, of course, they have these vast quantities of funny money that they can deploy. And then, of course, when they're holding all of these shares, this gives them a weapon to use on the market, dumping these shares back into the market.
But I actually did a commentary about that as it relates to your thesis on this, because I knew that was the position you held, and my thesis is a little bit different. Here's why. We know what Wall Street criminal banks and their associated allies can do to companies they want to victimize. They can naked short. We know it from Burns' work over at Overstock.com. I mean, we know that these guys can just target companies ruthlessly through naked shorting. They don't need to be honest enough to buy the stocks in order to short them, Jeff.
Well, but it helps. It is, and of course, if they're holding some shares, they can do legitimate shorting. they can lend out those. See, the central banks can lend out those shares for legitimate shorting operations on top of the naked shorting they do. The other thing that has to be understood here is the sheer quantity of pounding that this crime syndicate unleashes on markets in order to generate their crashes. We're talking overwhelming volumes. And so if they did all of this pounding with 100% naked shorting, it would be extremely difficult for them to do this pounding with on a purely naked basis because, what we've seen is we rarely see the so-called justice officials and regulators engaging in any enforcement actions against the crime syndicate, but they have done so occasionally, and it's been when the crimes have been so overwhelmingly obvious they can no longer pretend not to see them. So if they pound these markets, as I've been expecting for quite a while, with both shorting and naked shorting, the criminality is not nearly as evident. And so, the banks and the central banks can operate as a tag team. The central banks lending out these shares that they've been holding to smash the market, the bankers doing the dirty work, or the central banks can simply sell the shares on their own. But either way, it helps them flush these markets lower in a very major way. And see, the point here is, just as we've seen, the enthusiasm for the mainstream to continue pumping the bullion rally has waned substantially. You still see a little bit of positive bullish talk, but now we're seeing a lot of the bearish bullshit that we've been seeing for the last 5 years again. And similarly, the incentive to continue to allow the miners to rally has evaporated. They've already convinced people of the rally. They don't need to take them any higher. And so, we see them once again reverting to their predatory operations. So you see, I look at what's happening in the market for both the bullion and the miners as being, once again, very, very similar to what we saw over the past 5 years. And for me, that's powerful validation of my whole fake rally thesis.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, we'll explore that a little bit further as we go on. You mentioned the fact that the regulators don't much want to regulate the big banks, which is a good segue over to your banking crime article. But I want to leave you with one last thing, just as it pertains to physical silver and physical gold. We know that there's a absolute deficit globally of physical silver on the planet. Keith Neumeyer was telling me recently there's 1.1 billion ounces of physical demand every year. Meanwhile, we're only pulling around 800 million ounces of physical silver out of the ground. So I just want to finish up with Joseph's soundbite here about silver. Listen to this.
We're glad to be silver because it's got two uses. One, as a precious metal, and second, it does have almost 50% of the produced silver in the world is used for industrial use, and so we are happy that we are in the silver business.
Well, I of course, as you know, have long been more bullish on silver even than I am on gold, and of course, a lot of it has to do with what Mr. Grosso was saying about the industrial demand. We get this ludicrous propaganda line from the mainstream media that because of this massive industrial demand for silver, that silver is no longer a quote-unquote precious metal. It's an industrial metal.
Right.
Well, of course, silver is still money. Nothing can change its status as money. But along with being money, there's massive industrial demand. So in an extremely literal manner, silver is now much more precious than it has ever been in history. You can't add demand to something and then at the same time try to call it less precious. This is it's a perversion of language. And of course, the fact that silver has this massive demand component to it makes it even more precious than gold, especially of course when we consider that this industrial demand is literally consuming the global stockpiles of silver. Tiny quantities of silver are being used in billions and billions of consumer items, and because the silver is so radically underpriced, it's completely economically infeasible to recycle this silver, and so it's been accumulating in tiny quantities in landfills all over the planet. And of course, as Ted Butler has been telling us for decades, most of the world's stockpiles of silver are now gone. So it's this industrial demand that has made silver more precious than at any other time in history.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Here's what I think's entertaining about this conversation. So Grosso and Golden Arrow are sitting on 245 million ounces of silver in Argentina, and contrasted against that is the man who once called gold a barbarous relic, Warren Buffett, right? And what's he sitting on? He's sitting on an empire of crime with his Wells Fargo position and billions of dollars of fiat. Here's a man who represents the system, the establishment, and only wants it to continue. And in your latest article, U.S. Big Banks, A Culture of Crime, you write, this is gripping, guys, listen to this, organized crime. This phrase is now a precise synonym for big banking in the United States. These big banks commit big crimes. They commit small crimes. They cheat their own clients. They swindle outsiders. They break virtually every financial law on the books. What do all these crimes have in common? The big banks commit all these crimes again and again and again with utter impunity. These fraud factories commit their serial mega crimes year after year because the big banks know that they will never, ever be punished. On rare occasions, their crimes have become so egregious that U.S. justice officials could no longer pretend to be oblivious to them. In such cases, there was a token prosecution. There was a settlement where the law-breaking banks didn't even have to acknowledge their own criminality, and there was a microscopic fine, which didn't even force the felonious financial institutions to disgorge all of their profits from these crimes. Jeff, you are a fun writer. That was fun to read, but you're 100% right. This is the factory of crime, and the big banks sit atop the pyramid.
And of course, speaking of Mr. Buffett and his mountain of cash, yes, he's sitting with now over $72 billion in idle capital. He's 86 years old. He's a long-term value investor, which means, of course, by definition, that basically all of your money is supposed to be working for you all of the time. And the only time you ever sit with a large amount of dry powder on the sidelines is when you're expecting a big buying opportunity. So here is 86-year-old Mr. Buffett, who does most of his shopping on the S&P 500, clearly anticipating the biggest buying opportunity in his entire life because he has way more capital sitting aside than at any other time in the 4 decades he's been running Berkshire Hathaway. And yet the S&P 500 is sitting at bubble levels, which are more than triple the 2009 low. So the S&P 500 is sitting in record bubble territory. Warren Buffett is planning on going on a major shopping spree on the S&P 500 in the near future. What's going to happen?
Don't you find it insane? Like, life is so short. I've made this point in the past. Like, why would Hillary Clinton want to serve the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers when life is so short? It's because she's corrupt to the core. Don't you find it insane that Warren Buffett is sitting on $70 billion and he's hurting people? You write, what happens when you create a culture of crime in big banking? Not only the banks break laws with impunity, their bank employees do so as well. Case in point, Warren Buffett's favorite big bank, Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo employees came up with a great idea for boosting their salaries, stealing money directly out of the accounts of the bank's clients. And guess what, Jeff? Nobody's going to jail. And I bet nobody will go to jail. It's the culture of crime. And guess what, Jeff? That's why they're giving us Hillary Clinton, shoving her down our throats, because she serves these same people, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the banking cabal.
Wells Fargo is Warren Buffett's favorite bank. I mean, that's where he's put most of his own dirty money when it comes to the big banks.
And of course, recall he bailed out Goldman Sachs after the last crisis in 2008, 2009. He bailed out Goldman Sachs. Talk about his favorite bank. He loves criminal banks.
Well, you have to figure there's quid pro quo going on. We have these banking criminals who are the ultimate market insiders, and we have this investment icon who always manages to buy into companies at the right time. You don't have to be a detective to suspect what's been going on there for all these years.
Yeah, and of course, recall his position in silver. He held the world's largest position in silver when silver was down around $3-4, and I think he got out at, $5? Do you think he wasn't doing a favor for the same banking buddies at that point? He knew what silver was worth.
And of course, this goes back several decades, so you have to wonder if this was the time when Warren Buffett made his decision as to who he was going to make his allies for the rest of his investing career.
I agree. I absolutely agree. He made his deal with the devil. And you know what's crazy about it, Jeff? These people aren't going to live forever. Take a look at David Rockefeller.
Well, they say only the good die young.
Only the good die young. Right? Bill Hicks would like to hit on that point. And of course, he was taken far too early as well. But take a look at these monsters that rule the planet, right? You got David Rockefeller, I think, pushing, 100, 101. I think he just had his 5th or 6th heart transplant. I mean, sometimes it seems like they're going to live. Sometimes it seems like they're going to live forever. But guess what? The reality is they will meet their maker, and these people are going to have to pay for their crimes, the crimes they committed on this planet. And that's what astounds me about who they serve, about Warren Buffett so willingly serving these masters. Warren Buffett is not the richest man in the world, folks. I'm sure most of you listening know that. It's not Bill Gates. It's not Warren Buffett. It's not Carlos Slim. That's single lifetime wealth versus multi-generational banking family wealth. The Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the Vatican. You've got the monarchies in Europe. I just find it amusing that the world's quote-unquote richest people are people with single generational wealth, Jeff. What a joke.
Well, I've in fact I've written about that very topic before in my article entitled "The Oligarch Trillionaires." If you add up the world's wealth and you look at the people who are quote unquote supposedly the world's richest, their total piece of the pie is only a microscopic fraction as large as it would be to account for the total amount of wealth in various forms that are floating around the global economy. The total amount of wealth around versus what is held by the supposed world's richest list directly implies there's an entire echelon of oligarchs above them. So I've referred to this so-called world's richest list as the B-list billionaires. They're the lower level. They could even be the shoe shine boys for the oligarchs, because what else is Warren Buffett in reality?
Yeah, I think Salente calls them that, the white shoe boys, the shoe shine boys. It's hard to believe that somebody worth $70 billion might just be a puppet, but to a large degree, not completely, but to a large degree he is. Just like Hillary Clinton, the Clintons serve others. They serve the puppet masters, which is why billions of dollars can go missing from the Clinton Foundation, and there is no investigation. The mainstream media won't talk about it, and no one goes to jail. Meanwhile, they wheel her out in a little cart. They wheel her out, pretty soon it'll be a little wheelchair, and tell us that she is the preeminent human being that ought to sit in the White House. Well, guess what? The Clintons were created by the Bushes. The Bushes, the CIA, it all comes back to the intelligence agencies and the banks. Who started the intelligence agencies? The banks.
And Prescott Bush, who tried to overthrow the U.S. government and was dealing with Hitler, and of course his son and grandson end up as presidents of the United States. Can you imagine if Benedict Arnold's son and grandson had become presidents of the United States? But of course that's exactly the parallel with Prescott Bush's son and grandson becoming presidents.
Yeah.
And so we tell people, well, yes, it's hard to imagine that the supposed world's richest are merely puppets. But then, of course, for a lot of people, it's hard to imagine that the U.S. government is nothing but a puppet state ruled by the same oligarchs.
You're right. Prescott Bush was a Benedict Arnold. He was a traitor, as is Hillary Clinton, as is Bill Clinton. Hillary is going to take us into World War III, and many are calling her the biggest threat to world peace that exists, an existential threat to world peace. And I believe it. I don't know if you've seen the news here lately, Jeff, but this country, this government appears to be bombing the hell out of the Syrian army and then blaming it on Russia. And then we see a former deputy director of the CIA talking about the fact that what he wants to do is take out those that are close to Assad, take out those that are close to Putin, scare the hell out of them, make them think we're coming after them. These guys want to force us right into World War III, and the American people largely are not paying attention, I don't think. I know people dislike Hillary. She has literally no support. Nobody shows up for her rallies. But to the degree this country is trying to engage Russia in World War III, most people are sleeping right through that story.
Well, and it's because of all of the hardcore propaganda that continually tries to paint Russia as the villain here. And of course, because the majority of the sheep still look at nothing else but the nonsense from the mainstream media, this is all they're exposed to. And of course, if you're never exposed to even a glimmer of the truth, it becomes so much easier to believe the lies.
Oh, yeah, powerfully said. Well, and I think most people in this country are waking up. That's why we see a shift. We see people not trusting the mainstream media. I think that's the best news, is the mainstream media is now finding that it has about as much confidence from the American people as Congress does. It's around 11%. Nobody believes their lies anymore. Are you surprised at all by how blatant the establishment has been in propping up the lies against Putin, the lies against Syria, the lies against Assad, the lies in general? Are you surprised by the level of propaganda you're seeing in the mainstream media here in the United States?
I'm not surprised by that, nor am I surprised by the decline in credibility, because, one of the early themes when I first began Bullion Bulls Canada nearly 8 years ago was the compulsive liar syndrome, boy who cried wolf. And it's always the same chronology. The liar starts off beginning to tell lies. People believe the lies. The liar realizes he's got power, starts telling more and more lies. And of course, the irony is that as the liar is told more and more lies successfully, the liar gets more and more confident that he can lie as often as he wants, whenever he wants, and will always be believed. The contrary side of the dynamic is that the people who are receiving the lies gradually begin to clue in that they're being lied to over time, and so as the lies accumulate, they steadily become less and less plausible to the masses. So the liars become more and more confident in their ability to lie, just as the people who they're lying to start to wise up and finally become resistant to it. So this is the evolution we always see with serial liars. They always destroy their own credibility because they become arrogant that they can lie as much as they want forever.
Yeah, and then eventually a tipping point is reached. All right. Well, Jeff, thank you so much. I always love you because you're a truth teller. You wear it all on your sleeve. You don't mince words. You don't cover it up. You're willing to call the criminals out for who they are, and I sure do appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us.
Always a pleasure, and I, of course, appreciate your efforts as well, because I started doing interviews here, and, getting the opportunity to appear on your site was a big boost for my own career.
Oh, thanks, man. Well, Jeff, it's always a pleasure to have you. I really do appreciate your time. And, guys, you can check out Jeff's original writings at Sprott Money. Of course, he still has the site Bullion Bulls Canada, and we feature all of his articles as well at SGT Report. Thanks for tuning in. We very much appreciate you listening. We appreciate you liking this information if you did. Share it with others. And if you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, please do hit the subscribe button. It's free. You'll get the latest updates as we post new interviews and micro-documentaries. Have a wonderful weekend and have a wonderful week ahead. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.